Story number 1. When I returned home from a friend's house that evening, I discovered that my husband was cheating on me. Even though I had initially dismissed it, I had a gut feeling that something was wrong. My friend Emma not only detailed when and with whom she had seen my husband, but also presented me with a video shared by an acquaintance of hers who had a tendency to cheat. As I watched the video, rewinding it with shivers in my fingers, I realized that our intimate life was nothing special compared to what I had seen. Apparently, my husband was a real acrobat in bed. In my 43 years, I considered myself in good shape, so I couldn't figure out what I was missing. At work, surrounded mostly by male colleagues, I got plenty of attention from them and was well aware that many of them harbored fantasies about me. Although my husband didn't deny it, he insisted that he loved me and was just infatuated. I chose to believe him, but the feeling of resentment never left me. If he could, why couldn't I? Despite the temptation, which came only a week after our conversation, I held back from the prank. One spring afternoon, I decided to go shopping, wearing sneakers, pink leggings, and a t-shirt. I didn't know what exactly sparked my interest that day, but the atmosphere around me was lighthearted. After wandering around the local stores and getting flirty looks from strangers, I decided to head to the supermarket. The bus ride lasted about 40 minutes, and during that time the bus was packed with people. I managed to get a seat in the middle to stay out of the way since my stop was closer to the end of the route. When we got to the next stop, the bus became even more crowded, and I found myself being squeezed from all sides. After a while, I felt that someone behind me was pressing up against me because of the crowdedness. The situation was uncomfortable and seemed to favor the person behind me. However, when I turned around to see who it was, I was surprised to find my former brother-in-law, Jerry. He was no longer my son-in-law, as my daughter Avery had divorced him after less than a year of marriage. According to her, they didn't get along. It had been a long time since we had last seen each other, and it was certainly an unexpected encounter. I turned to him, trying to strike up a conversation, but the cramped space almost made us hug. I smiled and he reciprocated. Then we started chatting. Jerry lived alone in his apartment and was coming home. I don't know how he managed to convince me, but he successfully persuaded me to get off at the stop he indicated and go for a walk with him. We walked some distance and almost by chance ended up in close proximity to his house. We then made our way to his residence, had a sincere and heartfelt conversation while sipping wine, and then, as if we were bound together by an unbreakable bond, he hugged and kissed me. In Jerry's presence, I lost control of myself and experienced true happiness in bed. As a consequence, I started visiting him after work, as the time spent together was enjoyable and emotions overwhelmed us. Remarkably, after only 5 months of our relationship, I made the decision to leave my spouse and move in with him. Jerry and I are currently living together, maintaining a strong bond, and in 9 months, there will be an addition to our family. That's how I met my beloved, and my life got better. I couldn't stand my husband's cheating anymore. And I am very grateful to my daughter for introducing me to Jerry. Story number 2. I am 24 years old. My name is Frank. My wife is 22 years old. Her name is Sophia. Her mother, a lovely woman, despite her short stature, recently celebrated her 46th birthday. After the death of her husband, she was alone for a long time. Despite this, she never gave up hope of finding love again, which was evident in her meticulous grooming, fashionable outfits, active lifestyle, and friendly demeanor. Late one night, I needed to pick up something at my mother-in-law's house, which was not far from our studio apartment, where we kept some things. As I approached her house, I noticed that the door was slightly ajar, even though it was already 9 o'clock in the evening. Not knowing what to expect, I cautiously entered, peeked in, and was stunned by the sight before me, my mother-in-law and a man on her bed. Feeling awkward, I tried to remain unnoticed, hiding behind the wall. But curiosity got the better of me, forcing me to look again. Catching my mother-in-law's gaze, I quickly averted my eyes and ran out into the hallway, overwhelmed with shame and the ridiculousness of the situation. Sitting down on the floor, I expected my mother-in-law to come soon and was ready for her reproaches. But after a little listening and hearing the sounds of the old bed, I realized that she was not interested in me now. I took this opportunity to quietly sneak out and shut the door behind me. A few weeks later, my wife informed me that her mother had invited us over for dinner. Although I was uncomfortable about meeting my mother-in-law, I had no choice but to attend. Not knowing how to behave around her, I joined my wife and another couple, which happened to be my wife's brother and his girlfriend, at the table. While we were enjoying the wine, I deliberately avoided making eye contact with my mother-in-law, and I decided to go out on the balcony to have a smoke. To my surprise, after a minute, my mother-in-law joined me. "Well, my dear son-in-law, how are you doing? You seem kind of distracted today. Maybe you're feeling stiff after what you witnessed in my apartment?" "No, mother-in-law, why should I feel self-conscious?" "I didn't see anything out of the ordinary," I replied. My mother-in-law chuckled, then leaned closer and whispered, "But if you're not shy, then son-in-law, I look forward to your master class at my place." Just as the conversation began to unfold, we were called back into the room, abruptly interrupting our dialogue. I then realized that I was no longer avoiding meeting my mother-in-law's eyes and felt much calmer in the situation. 2 days later, I made the decision to call her and let her know I was coming over for dinner. She calmly replied, "Come over soon." As I walked up the stairs to her apartment, my heart raced. Upon reaching the door, my mother-in-law greeted me with her usual grace. Without saying a word, I leaned in to kiss her, enveloped in a cloud of bliss. When I came to my senses after meeting my mother-in-law, I went to work, realizing that things would never be the same again, and that soon I would be back in her bed. Story number 3. The garage resembled a warehouse and served as a place to store all the things they couldn't part with. The unexpected news that the garage area would be used to build a new home had them looking for a new place for everything. William, being a jack of all trades, had many tools and equipment he needed for the job. Now there was an urgent need to figure out where to move all this stuff. However, it was his mother-in-law who was the most upset. She had a habit of collecting various small things, hoping that someday they would be useful. Under the circumstances, she could keep only a part of her peculiar collection because the living space could not accommodate the mountains of junk. She had to quickly prioritize the most valuable items. William arranged for a friend who lived nearby to temporarily store the tools with him. That same day, an absurd amount of money arrived in the man's bank account from the city as compensation for the purchased land. The developer assured him that the garages would be demolished in just 2 days. They had to get everything out in time, so he got in his car, picked up his mother-in-law, and together they went to remove their belongings. His wife had been informed of the impending demolition, so she was secretly glad that she wouldn't have to be a part of it. She didn't even offer her help, preferring to spend the day off in more comfortable surroundings. When the son-in-law and mother-in-law entered the familiar garages, they were greeted by an eerie silence. Most of them were already open and empty. Only a few people were still parking their cars there, and the rest of the neighbors had long ago removed everything of value. After struggling with the lock, William was relieved that he wouldn't have to fumble with it for long, since the garage would soon be gone. With a sense of satisfaction, he snapped the key in half. "So, Patricia, shall we get started?" "Huh," the mother-in-law replied sadly. "Let's do this first. I'll move my things out. I'll take them to a friend's house for safekeeping, and in the meantime, you put away what we'll bring back to you later." "Of course." "Good," replied the mother-in-law. The garage was bustling with activity. There hadn't been this much activity in a long time. On a slightly chilly fall day, the man and woman had even taken off their jackets, leaving them in sweaters. As William worked, he became more and more glad that he would never have to deal with this junk again, as most of it didn't interest him. He was able to take everything he needed from there, so he had little to lose from this forced move. His mother-in-law, however, was becoming increasingly melancholy. She had many items that had some historical significance to her and held memories. Going through old and unwanted items, she would stop from time to time, thinking about the origin and history of each one. Some of the items were gifts, and others had been purchased by her in the past. William watched her actions with disapproval, but chose to remain silent and not judge his mother-in-law. In a way, he understood the nature of her emotional attachment to these things. The man had traveled to his friend's house 3 times to move his belongings there. In the meantime, the woman had only managed to sort through half of her junk. In addition to the slow process of organizing the smaller items, she needed the man's strength to handle the heavier items. William helped to the best of his ability, but gradually impatience took over. Like her, he too was running low on energy and would rather relax in front of the television eating pizza than continue moving bulky furniture in a room that was soon to be completely empty. "Patricia, let's wrap up our efforts for today. There's nothing to see anymore. There's nothing of value in there anymore, I'm sure. Just a few old chairs behind the closet and a dresser." There was definitely something in the dresser. "It's dark in here, so don't strain your eyes." "Well, then shine a flashlight on me if you couldn't get light in here all these years." "I don't need it now," he said, embarrassed. "You handled the situation well." The woman took a defensive stance. William decided not to provoke a conflict with his mother-in-law and remained silent, simply turning on the flashlight on his phone. He was very embarrassed that he, a skilled craftsman who makes a living fixing, building, and repairing things for others, couldn't even install a single light bulb in his own garage. Bored, the man noticed the silhouette of his mother-in-law, hunched over, digging in the dust on the floor. She possessed an attractive physique. If she were younger, and she wasn't my mother-in-law, and I wasn't married, I'd invite her out for an evening stroll. Whoa, woo, woo, woo. There's a lot of innuendo here. William shook his head, warding off the strange thoughts. For about an hour, the unusual couple explored the area illuminated by a bright lantern. From afar, they looked like looters who had decided to rummage through abandoned tools. The temperature had already dropped noticeably, and both family members' shirts were wet with sweat under their sweaters. The man twice offered to either finish the job or finish it the next morning, but his mother-in-law insisted on waiting a little longer. Eventually, at some point, William's cell phone flashlight ran out of power. Just what I needed, a dead cell phone, he thought. Now we'll definitely be done tomorrow. Okay, that's enough. Let's get changed and leave this place for good. There was such sadness in the woman's voice that her son-in-law felt sorry for her. "Patricia, don't be so upset. It's all in the past, and we have so many wonderful things ahead of us." William tried to cheer her up. "Thank you. Just close one side of the garage door, and I'll change," my mother-in-law asked. William closed one half of the garage door completely and headed for the car. "Oh no, I forgot my jacket. Would you mind grabbing it for me?" "It's lying on the passenger seat," she asked. William, who had already removed his wet t-shirt from his sweater, thought, what an unfortunate turn of events. Picking up his jacket, he reluctantly returned to the garage, which he already disliked very much. To his surprise, the iron door seemed to be resentful of him. Stepping inside, he stumbled and fell heavily to the cold floor. From the impact, the door pitched forward and slammed shut with a loud bang. William shouted a few curses, clutching his injured finger. When the sharp pain subsided, he stood up and looked for a way to open the door. It would not budge, however. He pushed it open with all his might, but his bare shoulder instantly froze to the icy iron. Their frustration echoed loudly in the confined space of the garage. The mother-in-law and son-in-law were left in complete darkness and uncertainty. It seemed impossible for them to get out on their own. William remembered the broken key in the door lock, and they immediately calculated how long it would take for their daughter to notice their absence. Unfortunately, their prospects looked bleak. Knowing the girl, she could easily have fallen asleep without waiting for her husband. Or perhaps she thought he had spent the night at a friend's house, where he had left his things. All the neighbors had already vacated their garages, and the builders were not due to demolish them until 2 days later. The family's situation was dire. Of course, they wouldn't starve to death, but William was already shivering from the cold. The temperature outside was about 7 degrees. It was foolish to expect the chilly garage to warm up quickly. The mother-in-law, of course, was taken aback by such an unexpected confinement. But after listening to her son-in-law curse twice, she decided to keep silent. Complaints would solve nothing, and William clearly needed support. "Put on my jacket," she suggested, realizing he was barely dressed. "Come on, it's a little small. You put it on, and I'll try to endure the cold." "No way. Let me keep you warm." Their voices sounded quiet but distinct in the cramped space. William reached out at the sound of the woman's voice, but it landed awkwardly on her lush breasts. The man was immediately embarrassed and jerked his hand away, but he remained silent and did not apologize. When the mother-in-law put her arm around his shoulders, the son-in-law hugged her waist in response, feeling not only the warmth and softness of her body, but also catching the notes of her fine perfume. This had a very peculiar effect on the man. The woman herself was still in some shock from what was happening, so the behavior of her son-in-law seemed to her just another strange act in a series of unusual incidents. She too remained silent, allowing her son-in-law to examine her body. "Put your hands under your t-shirt. Get as warm as you can," she whispered, not hinting at anything more. "What are you doing?" For the first time ever, she was indignant. "Just trying to keep warm as best I can," he repeated his mother-in-law's words. She was silent again and didn't utter a word until the morning. She was stunned by this unexpected turn of events. She did not resist, but simply accepted it. However, her son-in-law continued to warm his hands under his t-shirt. Like this, the night flew by in an instant. In the morning, hearing screams in the garage, they were saved by one of the neighbors who came to say goodbye to his storage container. He expected to see anyone but himself in the garage, and even his own mother-in-law. How had he spent the whole night with her? "I'd die if they locked me in with mine. But these are nice young men, ruddy, flushed, smiling," thought the neighbor. After this incident, the son-in-law often came to visit his mother-in-law when she was alone. He wanted to continue the story that happened on a cold day in the fall. As a man, he couldn't stand it any longer and wanted to be alone with her in the bedroom.